Okay guys, so we're out in the grass shooting this amazing house on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. You can actually see Maui right off the left-hand side. It's a beautiful setting out here, and I'm psyched to shoot this house. As always, I've gotten out here pretty well in advance and chosen my composition. For this, I've chosen to shoot straight on because I need to show the ocean. I've got to show these cliffs, and I want to show some of the house. I don't need to show all of it, but I think it's important that we show the best features of it. The composition I really want to get is actually a little bit wider than this. It's like a 16:9 horizontal composition. Now, I know that jumping into architectural photography can be daunting and expensive, so most people only buy one tilt shift lens at a time just to start the collection. And I want to show you how to shift horizontally to make up for a lack of width. So if you only have a 24, I'm going to show you how to get the same width that a 17 would have in a single shot. As you can see here, I've got the composition set for the house, but I don't get too much of the ocean, and I think we've got to show much more of it to make this shot happen. Let's take a look through the live view video feature of my camera here. As you can see, just by shifting the lens to the left, I'm able to pick up much more of that ocean, and it's actually super easy to put these photos together in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do, as soon as the light gets perfect, again, is that exterior ambient sunlight falls and the interior ambient light rises to match in exposure, I'm going to shift to the left. And that's the first thing I'm going to do before I start light painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift left, capture my scene, then shift back, and I'm going to feel that little notch right in the center of the tilt shift. Once I'm back there, I'm going to leave the camera alone, then I can easily composite those two halves together. My colors and exposure might not be perfect, but using Photoshop, we're usually pretty close because there's no real directional sunlight on that. I'm not worried about the light changing anymore. I can always bring the exposure down using curves to make it match perfectly. It's very important when you shift over when the light on the scene is perfect. If you were to shift after you did your light painting or after you got your main exposures, it might be too dark. It might be almost black. So you want to get it while there's still some color and light falling on the scene. As I've been talking to you, I've been bracketing constantly, trying to capture the wide range of brightness and color as the sun sets. I love the look of this shot right now, so I'm going to do my shifting. Then after that, I'm going to start light painting. Now, the sky to the left is almost completely dark, so it's time to light paint. What I'm doing here is using my Lowell GL1 to pretend that I'm coming from the house, that I am acting as the house light to light up some of these trees and bushes. I just want to add a little bit of snap, a little bit of sparkle to this. I don't want to go nuts and paint everything, because again, that would flatten it out and make it look kind of unbelievable. I just want to embellish what's there, add a little bit of pop, not take it overboard. The reason I used the hot light for this shot instead of the flash was that we've got so much wind and the trees are moving like crazy, and if I were to use a flash and just got that 1/1000th of a second flash duration, it would freeze the trees, and I don't want that. I want the light to move with the tree over the course of that 8 or 4 second exposure, so the hot light was the way to go for this shot. Now I'm looking at my shots here, and I'm noticing that on the bottom right of the frame there's this kiddie pool, and it's actually flaring a bit in the camera. So I went and got a flag, and I was going to put a flag in the water and get crazy with it, and I was like, why don't I just turn off the pool? Problem solved. Now you'll notice that there were a few of these can lights, and they were either burnt out or we couldn't figure out how to turn them on, who knows. But here's a quick tip to fix that, because this is something you're going to run into no matter what. I just took the GL1, pointed it straight to the top of that sconce, and that actually replicated the light that would have come out had there been an actual tungsten bulb in there. Super easy. I can lasso that in Photoshop, paste it in, it'll be done in 1 second. In this case, I didn't worry about light painting on the left-hand side of the frame because it's mostly ocean. If I wanted to shift and light paint the shifted part of the frame, I would do that at the very end. So the first thing I would do is shift left, capture the scene, then shift back to the center, light paint the main part of the frame, and then again, when I was done with that, shift all the way to the left and light paint over that as the last thing that I would do. So this lesson is a good example that if you're only going to buy one tilt shift lens, I'd really stick with the 24. You don't really need to go as wide as 17 when you can replicate it perfectly with the 24mm. Lastly, there's a couple of these gas lanterns. They're kind of like tiki torches that aren't lit. No problem, I'll show you how to Photoshop those in. It's a super easy fix. All right, so we have all the pieces to this shot. Let's open up Photoshop and put it together. Okay,
Okay, so that was our last shot of this tutorial, and it was an amazing location, and I think we got an awesome time of day. We got some great atmospherics in the clouds and an incredible view. You can actually see, I think you can see Maui off in the background in the distance, so it's super, super cool, and really excited to edit this. And there's a couple new techniques that I want to introduce here. First, as I mentioned on location, is the shift stitch, which can get a little complicated, especially when we're light painting, but I figure, hey, why not jump in at the end and throw it all together in one shot and just teach everything there is to know about it in the first place. And we're gonna do all this compositing with colors in the sky and lights in the pool, so it's gonna be a really complicated photo, but the end result is totally cool, so I'm psyched to edit this. So I'm not gonna bore you with any more theatrics, let's go ahead and jump right in. So as you guys have known, I've said this over and over and over, when we're shooting a twilight, we want the exterior ambient light to match the interior artificial light. And this was an interesting case because the interior lights were so bright and so, they were ready much, much earlier than I usually like. So we're gonna have to tame those interior lights. And another thing that I noticed was that because of all the warm woods, the warm wood and yellow light combined to kind of create this crazy, super orange interior ambient light, and that's kind of been like a hallmark of these Hawaiian houses so far. Everything, the interior light is just way too warm for my liking. So again, in Lightroom, I'm definitely going to want to tame that a bit before we jump into Photoshop. But first, let's start with the shift stitch. So again, as you saw on location, we're going to take two shots, one to the left and one to the right, and then combine them in Photoshop. Now, what you could do is you could, for example, take the left-hand side of the frame and the right-hand side of the frame, and in Lightroom you could just go edit in, merge to panorama in Photoshop. And that might be all well and good, but if you're going to be compositing light painting and skies and so on and so forth on top of that, you don't want to do that because Photoshop's going to bend those two photos together. It's going to use what it thinks is this very smart algorithm to make a perfect seamless blend of those two images into a panorama. But when you then later go and try to composite light on top of that, where you have your camera on a tripod and you're really counting on things not moving, Photoshop will ruin that. So don't do that. I'm going to show you a technique to manually blend those images together so you can stack your light painted exposures on top. First things first, as usual, I have to make sure all of my exposures match. So just like any other composited shot that we've done in Lightroom, let's go ahead and make sure all of our exposures match. Now, I've chosen to go a little bit darker. This is a bit of a brighter frame, so I'm not going to use this one. What I'm going to do is start with these darker frames because I know I'm going to add light to add interest and brightness. I'm just going to bump these like a third of a stop just to get a little more detail out of them, and then I'll let my light painting do the rest. So when these match, I know I'll be able to composite them together. I think this one's still a little bit dark, so I can mess with that, bring it up just a smidge. And you can flip back and forth and make sure the brightnesses match. Again, you can do this in your own method, whatever you think works. If you want to bring the exposure down or bump the exposure up, whatever will get you to the same endpoint of having those matched exposures, whatever works for you is fine with me. Even though I'm doing these Lightroom adjustments for you, if you're doing this on your own, before you start merging these panoramics together, make sure all of your exposures match. Okay, and so then we have me adding some light to the trees, and I personally like to wait until the ambient light has fallen a bit further so that my light painted highlights stick out really well, and then I can use my light and blend trick to blend everything together. So I'm going to select some of these darker frames with the light painting. Again, we've painted all over the trees and the landscape and all that. Frankly, I didn't light paint the house because honestly there isn't anything to paint on the house. There's almost no surfaces, no texture. It's open to the interior, so I can leave it alone and let it be. So we've got all of our light painted frames, and then there's a couple frames here where I'm adding light to the sconces. As you can see right here, I'm just sticking the GL1 in and lighting those things up. So we'll grab those as well. And lastly, I want a nice long exposure for the pool because I really want those lights to glow. So we've got all of our frames here. Let's take these into Photoshop and put this together. So in Photoshop, we'll go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and go ahead and select all 14 of these files, open them up, click OK. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go ahead and turn off everything, but our bottom two layers are left and our right. So this is that shifted left looking out over the ocean, and here's our island of Maui, I believe, which is super cool. And to the right we have the rest of the house. So before I start to combine these, I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to add a little bit more canvas to the left here. So I'm just going to go to, we'll say, I think 8,000 pixels should be enough, and that will extend our canvas out. And now I'll be able to drag this out, and you can see things will line up for our whole wide panoramic shot. So in order to align these perfectly, like I said, I don't want to leave this up to Photoshop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my layer number 13, that left shift image, out to where it roughly should belong, like right there. And I'm going to change the blend mode to difference. Now you might be thinking, who the hell ever uses this blend mode? This is probably the only time it's somewhat useful. And if you zoom in here and then use your arrow keys to nudge that layer, once it's perfectly aligned, everything will turn black. So you can see when we're not aligned, you get these crazy, weird, like Technicolor Dreamcoat things. But when we line it up nice and perfectly, you have a solid black image. And obviously it's not going to work up in the trees because the wind between the two frames is crazy. But on solid objects that aren't moving, you should get this nice, firm, black edge. So now that I know my images are aligned, I can go ahead and put the blend mode back to normal. And there we have perfectly aligned images. So I'm going to add a mask to this left-hand shift layer. And taking a brush, I'm just going to clean up that edge so that it seamlessly blends into the house. Super easy. And if I turn that on and off, you can see we have a perfect stitch shift composite, and one that, in addition, will not get all weird when I start to add light layers because the pixels really haven't moved from where they were in the camera. All right, so here's our scene. I'm going to go ahead and crop and get rid of that extra white on the left-hand side. And click Enter. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make this pool lit up. Now, right now it just looks like this dark, ominous pool. So I'm going to grab a frame from the end of when we were shooting, and I want these pool lights. Again, I'm trying to blend time. I want the pool nice and lit up. I want our light painted in. So I'm going to grab this pool frame from maybe an hour after sunset or something, or a half an hour after sunset. And I'm going to select the entire pool, and using that frame, I'm going to turn those pool lights on. Let's see, I'll do it right on the layer here so we can see where that light extends to. And just taking a minute, using the pen tool, start dragging out lines over the entire edge of the pool. So I've selected the entire pool. I'm going to hit Shift F6, and I'm going to feather the entire edge to like 5 pixels. So there's a bit of a wider seamless transition from dark to light, and I can go ahead and click Add Layer Mask. And what that is going to do is basically, in essence, turn on those pool lights in our shot. And now you can adjust the opacity to taste, or you can leave it at 100, or you can do whatever you want. I'm going to personally leave it at 100. And then I'm going to take a brush, and some of this I think is a little bit too hot, so I'm going to brush it out at like 30% opacity, just up there and in this sort of these highlight reflections. There we go, something like that. And I think this looks pretty good, but this pool, to my eye, it seems a bit brighter than it would be in real life. relative to the darkness of the entire scene. So I'm going to take a quick curves layer. I'm going to group together our base. I'm going to name it base. And I'm going to add a curves layer between the base and the pool. And I'm just going to darken it a little bit so it feels a bit more realistic. There we go. You can just totally to taste. If you like it dark, you can do it dark. If you want it bright, keep it bright. And let's see, I do want to add a little bit more of an interior glow to the inside of this house. So I'm going to turn on this number 10 layer here and set the blend mode to lighten. And that, in essence, just lightened the entire interior fairly simply. But there's a couple problems, and it looks like if I turn that on and off, I've got a little bit of shifting going on, so you can see that these layers aren't lined up perfectly. And I know what's causing that. I know it's our background here, so I'm going to go back down to our base layer, and I'm just going to grab a black brush, and I'm going to clean up our panoramic merge here. I can turn the rest of this stuff off for the time being. And again, there's my left-hand side of the frame. I'm just going to paint out more of it. And there might be a little shift in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that edge somewhere where I already know there's going to be motion. So I'm going to go right through the middle of the trees and the pool to kind of cover our tracks. And now if I turn back on that interior mid layer, things should line up absolutely perfectly. There we go. Much, much better. So all that really happened was things got a little out of line because of the shift. I just kind of cleaned up our blend of the two layers and made sure to keep the entire house and all my light painting on one perfectly aligned stack. So now that everything's lined up again, I'll go ahead and investigate in here. And I think, like I said, this middle interior scene was a bit too bright. So I'm going to add a mask. And I'm just going to paint out some of that overexposed interior there. And I think maybe there's a little bit. If I take this darker layer, number 11, and drag it up, yeah, that'll darken the interior. All right, so what I'm going to do to get some of this darker light to come through is I'm going to turn on this number 11 layer here. We'll make a quick luminosity mask. And I'm going to give a little curve adjustment here to really bring out those whites. Go ahead, make a mask out of that. Go back to our layers. And there is our darker interior, just kind of taming all those hot spots inside. And I can go ahead and paint out that mask where I know I'm not going to need it. All right, so interior is looking pretty good. Nothing too obscenely blown out. I'm going to group those together and call it interior. I'll group the pool and the base together and call it base. And now all we really have left to do is some light painting. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on these sconces here. Again, I just jammed that hot light in there. I'll set the blend mode to lighten. Alt-click to add a black layer mask. Zoom way in here. Just come right around the edge of that light with the selection. And I'm just going to gently start brushing in that faked sconce. And we just lit that thing up completely perfectly. Do the same thing for the near sconce. I'm going to come in, make a selection. And refine that with the brush. Set the blend mode to lighten. Or in this case, we're getting some crazy color action, so I'll leave it on normal. And I'm just going to use the brush to blend it in nicely, make it feel realistic. And I'm just going to clone out that little excess bit of the light that was still in the frame. Okay, so there's our sconces turned on. Things are looking nice and natural here. Should I go a little higher on that? Probably, right? There we go. Okay, so now all we've got to really do is add our light painting. I'm gonna just group all these together, name it light painting. Group these together, name them sconces. Keep this nice and tidy. All right, so first one, these treetops up here. Alt-click, add a black layer mask, set the blend mode to lighten. And just start painting in the tops of those trees. Being careful not to expose myself back there. I can do the number 6 layer here, same thing, just more light on those trees. You can go back to these far trees down here, Alt-click, blend mode to lighten, select a white brush. So I'm starting to get these funky little colors in here. I forgot to turn the curves layer, the darken layer back on, and the pool layer after I adjusted the blend of the two images together for the base. So make sure we keep that dark, that'll help. All right, so we'll keep blending in these light painted bits here. Alt-click, blend mode to lighten. Take our brush and paint in some light on those trees. Again, being careful not to get any people in the shot. And I'm just going to keep doing this for all those hot light scenes. Then we come over to the edge of the pool here. And this is really nice. This gives a really great definition along that whole edge in this bush as well. Makes it feel like that light is spilling over the edge, lighting up the left-hand side of the image. Yeah. Get some light in that lava. And then lastly, I want to take care of this little patio here. I'm going to leave the blend mode in normal. It looks like there's a little bit of a color shift as the light changed. If I set it to lighten, what might happen is, yeah, I'm going to get some of this funky purple coming out. But if I leave it on normal, we'll have everything remain consistent color-wise. Make sure I don't go over my interior, which I already made sure was perfect. Okay. So now we're looking really good. Turn that on and off. It really brings that whole scene to life. I'm going to add a mask to the entire group. It looks like some of it's a little bit too hot, so I'll just tone it down in some spots. All right, this is looking really nice. The one thing that's been bothering me is just how dang bright this grill is. So on a new layer, I'm going to select that whole grill. And to tone it down, we're going to use my gradient trick. Just so it doesn't feel so blown out. Perfect. Much better. Okay, this is looking really good. I'm going to brighten up the interior just a bit more. We'll take a curves layer. Name it interior. And what I want to do is just brighten up that interior. So that's kind of our main focal point here. Invert it, Command I, take a brush, paint in some exposure in there, but not too much, and I'm not going over the floor. Again, we already did a pretty good job taming the highlights, just a bit where it's darker in the back here. That looks really nice. All right. So I think I'm generally very happy with this. Let's see if there's anything I can fix with this. I can kind of clean that up a little bit. Some of that light painting might get a little stray, sort of make things look a little funky. So you can clean it up to taste. There we go. That looks nice and believable. All right. There's a couple problems in the foreground I want to address. There's this lens flare down here, and I feel like this pool has to be either much more prominent or completely gone. And I'm going to try something fun here. Let's see if I can make it stand out a little better. First, I want to get rid of this flare, though. And I know at some point we covered that flare. So I'm going to duplicate this pool layer, drag it to the top, delete the mask, Alt-click to add a black layer mask, and just paint away some of that flare. And I'm going to now pen tool. I want to bring out the intensity of this foreground pool, kind of like a little kiddie pool hot tub. And I feel like right now it's in this weird limbo state where it's not bright enough to add to the photo, but it's not dark enough to really be out of the way. So I'm going to select it with the pen just around the edge. All right, I'll come back and I'm going to close my selection over here. I'm going to activate our selection here. I'm going to go to Select, Save Selection. And I'm going to name it Foreground Pool. I can now deselect that, and I'm just going to grab a huge chunk of pool right here. I'm going to hit Command-Enter to activate the selection, and Command-Shift-C to select, Command-V to paste. And I'm going to drag this out and resize it to cover that entire foreground pool. All right, this looks really goofy, but hopefully this will work. Now I'm going to load that selection. Click OK. Going to add it to this layer. After I've added our selection to that layer, I'm going to unlink these two layers so I can move this pool around freely. I'm just going to find a good spot that feels a bit natural here. Something like that. I'm going to set the opacity to like 80 or 50% or so. We'll go with 50. All right, now on this layer, this looks obviously super fake. I'm going to take a brush at 50% opacity, just guessing here. Nice soft brush. And along that edge, I'm going to go to 100%. 100% opacity. Along that edge, sort of paint out the hard edge of our fake pool. This is going to keep that transition feeling natural. I still think it's a little rough. So let's go to like 50%, take another brush, paint it out on some of these rocks. All right. That's not doing it for me. There we go. I'm just going to follow the line of that shadow, make it feel much more natural. All right, that feels pretty good. Now there's actually some interest down there. Okay. So that's looking good. I'm gonna, let's see, rename these, or group them together, and name it foreground pool brightness, and the interior brightness here. So on the whole, this is looking really good. The last thing I want to address is the sky. It feels like I like the color, I like the mood, it just feels a little bit flat. I want it to be a little more vibrant. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to my channels palette, and I'm going to make a luminosity mask to bring some brightness out of the sky. So let's see here. Let's select, obviously the blue channel is super flat. Green channel a little bit less so. Red channel is looking good. I'm going to duplicate that red channel. Let's see if I can get anything interesting out of this here. Or something like that. That's going to be my mask. I'm going to Alt-click. Add a curves layer. I'm going to name this sky. And before I get started, I'm just going to paint it out of areas that it is unlikely that I'll need it. For example, the foreground. I only want this to affect the sky, not the interior. That should be all right. All right, now back on this mask. Just going to play with these curves, add some contrast in here. In addition to playing with the luminosity, you can play with the color. So if I want to add a little bit of red, bring out some of that purple back there, that doesn't hurt either. I'm just going to refine this a bit and keep it off those trees. Got a little goofy up here. Take a black brush, paint it out. We're adding some luminance back there, some vibrancy. And again, that's just another use of a luminosity mask to add a little punch to the sky. So using curves is one way to do it. I can turn that on and off, and you can see the difference there. If I wanted to use the, for example, the color range tool, I could do the same thing. And that would be a nice mask to mess with, but again, you kind of do lose the red. So I'm using the luminosity to grab everything in the sky that has a certain brightness. If you wanted to replace the sky using any number of techniques, totally acceptable. I just want to show you guys another trick to bring out some color, some vibrance, some punch to your skies. So let's, I think that's looking really good. Let's go ahead and add a curves mask here. Add a little vignette. Keep the interest where I want it. Invert that. Take my brush. That's looking really nice. And let's see. Oop. Last thing I can think of here is we've got these tiki torches over here that are burnt out. So I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm going to grab this tiki torch right here, Control-Shift-C, Control-V. I'm going to paste it to a new layer. I'm going to drag this flame over, make it a little bigger. I'm not too worried about the pixelization because I know I'm going to change the blend mode here. Set the blend mode to, let's see, let's try screen. And what screen is going to do is going to remove any black from that layer. And I've just gone ahead and replaced that tiki torch. And like I said, I wasn't too worried about the pixelization because even at, I'm at like 4,000%, that looks pretty good. And I can just duplicate that layer, do the same thing for this one. But this time I'll probably flip it horizontal so it doesn't feel like I'm cheating. Take my brush, brush out some of those obvious copy remnants there. And I'm just going to clean up some of that transition. There we go. You can alter the opacity on the entire layer, but that might look a little funky. I'll leave it at 100. All right, we've got our tiki torches lit in the foreground. Got them all in the background. Lastly, this is bothering me, so I'm just going to clone that out. No big secret here. New layer. In the branch, clone, put these together. Take my clone stamp tool, nice and soft. Get rid of those guys. And down here, there's a little weirdness, I think, from when I put the layers together at the beginning. All right, quite happy with this. So Command-Alt-Shift-E, flatten all to a new layer. It's a 1-point perspective, so we'll get our horizontal lines and our vertical lines nice and straight. Looks like we have a little bit of skewing to do. All right, that looks good. Lastly, I think this is kind of ugly, so I'm just going to zap it right on this layer. And that'll be the last thing for this image. All right, there we have it. All right, so that finishes up this image. This one is, I think, one of the most complicated things we've done for this whole tutorial, between the shift stitching and the pool and the light painting and luminosity masking and the pen tool. Had a little bit of everything, but again, you put all that together, you can get these amazing, amazing results. All right, guys, so that was our last house in Hawaii. I love the final result and all the techniques that it took to get there. Some super interesting stuff, kind of combining all of them in one final result. Thank you guys so much for following along. I hope you learned a ton throughout this entire tutorial.